good afternoon. We will be starting our side event right now. On behalf of the co-organizers, a long list of co-organizers, the Center for Dialogue and Progress-Geneva, the permanent missions of Afghanistan, Liechtenstein, and Iceland to the UN in Geneva, the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect, Center for Human Rights Advocacy, and Gender Apartheid Campaign, and the Duty Legacy. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this side event this afternoon. Against the backdrop of widespread human rights violations in Afghanistan and decades of absolute impunity in the country, over the past years, we have seen some important steps taken toward accountability. We have known of proceedings at the ICC, the work of the Special Rapporteur, who is here with us on the panel, and a potential case before the ICJ on the ground of violations of CEDAW by the Afghanistan, and the growing advocacy around codification of gender apartheid international law, and finally the establishment of an investigative mechanism for Afghanistan. So along this list of efforts, there are some concerns have emerged from some, including member states, and they fear proliferation of mechanisms, or they are uncertain how these initiatives can fit together. There's also a general lack of awareness or information about the progress on these initiatives, or about their potentials and also their limitations. So we have convened this panel today precisely to address these concerns. Our goal is to take stock of the progress on these efforts, highlight complementarities, and also, and more importantly, identify the gaps that could be filled by an additional investigative mechanism. I'm Hamid Foumuli, a fellow with the Center for Dialogue and Progress-Geneva, and it's my absolute honor to moderate today's session, joined by 4 very distinguished panelists who each of them are at the forefront of action or advocacy on these efforts that I've mentioned before. So to begin the side event and also to set the stage for the discussions of the panel, first I would like to ask Ambassador Nasir Andesha, the permanent representative of Afghanistan, to deliver a brief opening remarks. And Ambassador, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You got even 1 more minute, it was 3. Esteemed colleague, distinguished guest, co-panelist, friends, and ladies and gentlemen, the one who are here in the room and also online, good afternoon. I understand that there is marathons of side events, and also there's a difficulty to navigate around this new building that we are to find where actually we are. But thank you for coming here. And it's, as Mr. Foumuli has mentioned, that now it's almost 3 years that this push by the Afghanistan Civil Society and Human Rights Organization, but also by the Permanent Mission of Afghanistan here, to complement the SR's relentless work and a mandate by an independent investigative mechanism, also to complement the other accountability efforts from the ICC to ICJ to universal jurisdictions, is going on. And of course, there have been back and forth. There have been moments of hope, also moments of disappointment. But we hope again that we are nearing that moment that an independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan to be established. And the reason is, as I alluded in my remark during the enhanced interactive dialogue, that we don't see any changes. All the hopes for some sort of internal reform has diminished. And the last one was that the Taliban announced that their government is now permanent. So even that phase of having an interim or caretaker government going through some sort of a reform or legislative process within which we hope for some sort of ease on all those edicts, including the one which is akin to gender apartheid on women and girls in Afghanistan. So unfortunately, we reached that point, and it makes it imperative that we will have now, we should have at the 5th year of the Taliban, an independent investigative mechanism to complement other efforts, and together we create what we call the circle of accountability, and I mentioned that. And I also echo what Special Rapporteur, Mr. Richard Bennett, which I thank for his also tireless efforts, has mentioned as the all tools approach. I understand, all tools approach is related not only here to what we can do at the Human Rights Council, but also in the Security Council, in ECOSOC, in General Assembly, everywhere, from the targeted economic sanctions against and financial sanctions against the Taliban leaders, which I can see, coming from different parts of the world, to other avenues that we need to explore. But in all of this, I think an independent investigative mechanism, something akin to what's happening in Myanmar right now, which member states will have a lot of say in it, is something that we are looking forward, and our human rights and civil society, particularly women and girls group, keep asking. And recently we had a letter again signed and circulated by more than 100 entities and institutions. So without further ado, I will let the main speakers who covering the technical aspect of this to speak, but I will conclude that I think this is a time, but we need to leverage all the tools that we have in our hand. And I understand that around the world it's very chaotic. I think we came from a meeting of the OIC about Qatar, and there's a request for a special session. There is lots of other things going on. But in the case of Afghanistan, there is a possibility of action, and there's a possibility of making a difference. I think that's the difference, because there in that case, and the particularity of gender persecution in Afghanistan makes this case still unique and worth your attention and action. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for framing the discussion. And with that foundation, I now turn to our distinguished panel. And I would like to address the first question to Mr. Richard Bennett, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, who is very well known to all of us in this room. Mr. Bennett, we would like to hear your reflections on the progress made in documenting human rights violations and advancing accountability under your own mandate, and also what gaps still exist, and if a potential mechanism is established, how could it complement your work, and how they both could best coexist. Over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Formuli, and thank you very much to the co-organizers of this important event, and greetings to my co-panelists in the room and I think online as well. It's great to have a very specific question, and thank you for that. I think we're all aware that now, in the 5th year since the Taliban took power, the situation in Afghanistan remains serious. And the Taliban's attacks on rights and freedoms of the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls, is ongoing and intensifying. And as Ambassador Andisha mentioned, I've stated on many occasions, I don't know if I coined the term, an all-tools approach is needed to respond and to push back on the Taliban's discrimination, persecution, and oppression. And accountability is central to this. It's a critical tool in the toolbox. There are several accountability tools available already. One of them is the ICC. And there's been significant progress with the announcement of arrest warrants against 2 Taliban leaders in July. And I'd also like to mention that I'm in touch with the ICC, and they wanted it to be known that despite, how I put it, pressures on them recently, their Afghanistan investigation is continuing and is actually moving forward well. There's also a group of member states, Australia, Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands, who've announced an initiative to hold Afghanistan to account for violations under CEDAW, and this may end up before the ICJ. There's also an initiative for the codification of gender apartheid in a potential crimes against humanity treaty being negotiated in New York. And on the civil society side, I note that next month, the Permanent People's Tribunal will hold a hearing on gender justice in Afghanistan. But despite this, and despite the Human Rights Council seeking to address gaps in documentation and accountability efforts by strengthening my own mandate and increasingly empowering it, at least on paper, with resources to undertake investigations, there is a clear need for more. As Special Rapporteur, investigation and documentation is an important role, but only one of a number of roles that I perform. And as you're aware, I write public reports for this year alone, in addition to issuing press releases, statements, other communications, engaging with different stakeholders, be they states or civil society or the UN, providing strategic advice, and so on. I need to be clear about the impact of the UN's financial crisis on my ability to discharge my mandate, in particularly the documentation part. On paper, I have a strong team, and I thank the Council for that. 10 members of staff are funded to support me, or at least the budget is approved, including staff with investigation, legal, reporting and analysis expertise. In reality, I have a fraction of this. Currently, the office provides me with 2 staff, and I have another who's seconded from UN Women, thanks to UN Women. Recruitment freezes may mean that I will struggle to hire the 2 investigator posts. And I am having to initiate some of my own fundraising, although I have to be careful around that, to bring in specialist expertise. So 3 years down the line, the full potential of the SR Plus mandate has yet to be realized. There's so much that can be done to investigate and report on the situation in Afghanistan if I had the resources that were mandated by the Council. But it's important to note that even if my mandate was fully resourced, fully staffed, there are things I could not do. And this includes conducting detailed and in-depth investigations, including interviews and collecting other evidence, to a standard that would be usable by international criminal justice bodies. Secondly, preserving evidence of violations of crimes in a way that can be used directly by a court. At the moment, I collect and preserve information, but this is not at the criminal standard of evidence required. It is at a human rights standard. And thirdly, identifying perpetrators, including those on the ground as well as those with command or superior responsibility. And central to this is linkage evidence to establish responsibility against senior officials responsible for international crimes. There is a gap, and one which I think needs to be addressed by establishing an additional and complementary investigative mechanism, empowered to undertake the in-depth level of investigation required to support criminal justice processes, such as at the ICC. Unlike the ICC, however, this mechanism should be able to undertake interviews and evidence-gathering activities inside Afghanistan and neighboring countries. Would also be available to share information with other justice mechanisms. Thus, a new mechanism would perform a function that neither I nor UNAMA can perform. My mandate, because of the public-facing role that I play and the reports I publish, which provide analysis and determinations about alleged violations and advocate the strengthening of international legal frameworks and examining the human rights impacts of violations and crimes. Maintaining this level of engagement while simultaneously conducting in-depth investigations of the kind needed to support prosecutions regarding Afghan perpetrators would be just about impossible. UNAMA also documents violations, and it's also not, in my view, in a position to undertake the role. It engages in vital protection work on the ground and is also actively engaged as in liaising with the de facto authorities, including through the Doha process. So I see such a mechanism being strongly complementary of both my role and others, while supporting and strengthening the work of the ICC and other future accountability processes. And I would encourage clear language on cooperation between each of these entities in a resolution establishing the mechanism, which would ensure that not only is the work mutually reinforcing, but would also help increase efficiencies, which is critical at a time where the UN is facing seriously straitened financial circumstances. And I think further work, and I won't go into it now due to time, could be done on ways to reduce costs. For example, starting with a smaller team and scaling up as resources become available. And I do note the reality that this financial crisis is not going to be short-lived, regrettably. It will be around for some time. But action now is needed as a strategic choice to invest in Afghanistan and the global fight to end impunity. And I want to make a comment here about women's rights. There is a global pushback on gender equality. Other states who are part of that pushback are surely watching closely what is happening in Afghanistan. And if there are no consequences for the Afghanistan model, it will likely embolden others. Afghanistan, what happens in Afghanistan has consequences beyond its borders in several different ways. So I see, in conclusion, that the creation of a new accountability mechanism is a critical tool in the overall toolbox, both to challenge the Taliban on its human rights record and to push back on threats to human rights and security globally. Failure by the Council to act now will send a devastating message to the people of Afghanistan and an emboldening message to the Taliban. What's needed now is courage, not caution or deferral. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for the very concrete and important insights and for the very powerful message on the implications of non-action on Afghanistan, but also its wider implication globally. Now we turn to the international legal avenues to hold Afghanistan accountable. Before that, I would also like to acknowledge that we have around 30 online participants who are joining us through WebEx and 2 of our speakers. I forgot to acknowledge their presence at the beginning. And speaking on the legal avenues, we have our second panelist who is joining us online, Ms. Natasha Arnpriester, a Senior Strategic Litigation Officer at the Open Society Justice Initiative. Natasha and also her organization, OSGI, have been one of the leading forces behind advocating for this potential case at the ICJ. And Natasha, we would like to ask you about the legal initiative to hold Afghanistan accountable on the grounds of violations of CEDAW. Where does this initiative currently stand? What are the next steps and what potential it holds for advancing accountability? And more importantly, how can other efforts that we mentioned here such as another mechanism, support, or strengthen this process. Thank you, Natasha, and you have also 5 minutes.
I think I'm muted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes, please go on.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, no, thank you for the questions and interest, and I apologize I'm unable to be there in person. It's actually for very good reason. I've had the honor of joining several Afghan colleagues in the US to discuss some of the questions that you put forward. So very timely to have this discussion, and a kind hello to my esteemed co-panelists. It's good to see you. I think as most of us know, we are on now almost 1 year of this process under the CDOT dispute. On September 25, 2024, Australia, Canada, Germany, and Netherlands, I think some might be in the room, formally triggered the dispute settlement mechanism under CDOT. And this is really a historic step. It's the first time CDOT dispute process has been activated. And under CDOT, it lays out a 3-stage process before the case could go to the ICJ if it were to go before the court. And first comes notification. A country would formally tell Afghanistan it believes the convention has been violated, and this would create a legal dispute. The second step would then to go through good faith negotiations to try and resolve that dispute. Third, if those negotiations were to fail, the parties are then expected to attempt arbitration, and then only if arbitration cannot be arranged within a 6-month period, which is a time period that the convention lays out, because let's say Afghanistan refuses or they delay or the parties can't agree to the terms of arbitration, then the case can be filed at the ICJ. So right now, the 4 states are in that second step, in that negotiation stage. The ICJ is not yet seized of the matter. We don't have a case. I think there is an open question among civil society of our negotiations potentially already exhausted, right? We're seeing the situation in Afghanistan for women and girls continue to deteriorate. And if the states are, really pushing ahead, pushing this forward, why are we seeing this decline? And so I think, are the states at this point doing enough to demonstrate that they've pressed the Taliban in good faith hard enough towards compliance? In terms of next steps, the immediate priority is for these states to complete that pre-filing requirement if they were to take this case forward. And that really is documenting their negotiation process to demonstrate to the court that what they are doing in terms of negotiation, whether that's meeting, sending note for balls, is in good faith to try and bring Afghanistan back into compliance with CEDAW. At that point, then, of course, like I said, they would move on to the arbitration stage that would start that 6-month clock. So really beyond that, we're kind of in a wait and see process. I think, however, in the meantime, advocates can start gearing up in anticipation if a case were to be filed. For instance, calling on other states. I know there are other states in the room right now to potentially participate through a third-party intervention, which they can do through the court statute of Article 62 or Article 63, which allows them to join into the case if they feel their own interests are affected or they want to put forward their own interpretation of CEDAW. We've seen this mechanism being used in other cases, in particular South Africa, Israel. There's a lot of global interest of state interventions in that case, Ukraine v. Russia as well. And there is really a lot of growing public pressure to ensure that this case keeps, or this process keeps moving forward. Some folks in the room may have seen that an organization called Avaz put forward a petition really urging those governments to continue pushing forward with this case and not let it stall. That campaign was launched about 2 weeks ago. As of this morning, there were already over 160,000 people who have signed that case. So it's that petition. So really good to see that global solidarity in wanting to see this mechanism of justice move forward. In terms of potentials for advancing accountability, if this case were to reach the court, there is real potential to advance accountabilities in several ways. The court can provide really legal clarity by issuing a formal binding declaration that Afghanistan is in breach of its international law obligations, which, as we know, is a precondition to any sort of de facto recognition. And it can also violate, what specific violations it can identify what specific violations are occurring under CEDAW, be that bans against work, bans on education, movement, healthcare. I think we could go through the entire gamut of the convention at this point. It can also issue compliance orders, which would require Afghanistan to remove any sort of discriminatory policies on education, for example, also guarantees of non-repetition, for instance, requiring the de facto authorities to repeal unlawful decrees or not issue any additional ones. It also has a mandate of evidence production, so it can order Afghanistan not to destroy records and also cooperate with investigations if we were to have an international mechanism put forward. And then I think most critically is the court can grant something called provisional measures. And what those are urgent orders to stop ongoing violations while the case continues forward. And these can be ordered in a matter of days to weeks. They're very quick, and they're just as binding as a final order that we make it years later once this case, or if this case is filed. I think, as most people in the room know, we're not dealing with the criminal court. Mr. Bennett talked a bit about the different accountability thresholds with criminal accountability or human rights accountability. We're more in that human rights accountability space with state responsibility. So this case would not send, let's say, de facto leaders to jail. That's not the ICJ's role, but it would create binding international legal obligations and a really powerful tool for advocacy and potential enforcement. To your last question about how other accountability initiatives can help, we have other processes like the special rapporteur's reporting, or if we were to get an investigative mechanism that can really reinforce this legal initiative. For instance, it can feed the record of this case. If this case were to move forward, mechanisms can gather, verify, organize the evidence that then the states can use to present to the court. And in fact, we saw in the South Africa v. Israel case under Genocide Convention, the ICJ actually explicitly ordered through provisional measures that Israel allows access to the UN fact-finding missions and investigative bodies. So I think this shows some precedent how these mechanisms can really be integrated and complement one another. It can also channel survivors' voices, right? Because individuals or NGOs can't directly sue at the ICJ. An independent mechanism could package survivor testimony and documentation so that it reaches the court through the state's proceedings and really ensures that Afghans' lived experiences are not excluded from the record. I think I'm coming at time, or I might have passed time, but we have more details. My organization, Open Society Justice Initiative, we did create an FAQ that would answer a lot of questions that you might be having. That's on our website. You can Google that really quick. We worked with Rabadari, a really great Afghan organization, in making videos as well to these different questions on YouTube, which are in English, Farsi, Dari, and Pashto. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for your valuable contribution and also for sticking to the time limit. And before we go to our next online speaker, I would just request the conference services to regulate the volume in a way that we can best hear the speaker. Now we turn to the broader normative development, and that would be the codification of gender apartheid international law. And to elaborate on this important and expertly topic, I'm pleased to welcome our colleague Azada Raz Mohammed, who is also joining us online due to some unforeseen circumstances that led to the cancellation of her trip to Geneva. She's a legal advisor for the End Gender Apartheid campaign and also a PhD candidate in law at the Melbourne Law School. Azada, could you share your thoughts on the potential that codifying gender apartheid in international law offers for accountability? What is the current state of progress in this regard, and also what would be the next steps? And looking at the bigger picture, how could other initiatives, such as the one we named, would strengthen this process or vice versa? Thank you. Azada, over to you for 5 minutes. Can you hear us? Yeah. You're muted. We can hear you, Azada. Maybe it's the headphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we do. Please go on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Melissa for the kind introduction, and good afternoon and greetings from Melbourne, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I also apologize for not being able to travel to Geneva this time again. And I really hope that I make it to the next session of the council, hopefully. Thank you so much for the good question. Codifying gender apartheid in international law has the potentials to formally acknowledge the systematic, institutionalized, and state-sponsored gender-based domination and oppression as a distinct and punishable crime, similar to racial apartheid that currently we have a distinct crime, and this would enable the accountability of the alleged perpetrators to for the full scope of the harms that they are causing to women, girls, and others, similar to the situation of Afghanistan under the Taliban control currently. At the international level, despite efforts to criminalize gendered crimes and strengthen gender-based prosecutions, gender crimes are frequently regarded, unfortunately, as auxiliary or secondary offenses. Currently, no internationally recognized crimes that specifically addresses the deliberate maintenance of a totalizing gender subjugation regime with explicit intent to maintain that institutionalized domination and its violent enforcement mechanisms, such as in the case of Afghanistan the past 4 years, doesn't exist, unfortunately. For example, the images and the reports of the recent heartbreaking earthquake in Afghanistan that we had embodies how the Taliban's gender apartheid transformed a natural disaster into a double tragedy for the women of Afghanistan. The earthquake injured them, but the Taliban's policies trapped them in silence, with female rescuers blocked from duty and the male responders barred from offering care. Many women were left to suffer or possibly die. An urgent humanitarian emergency turned fatal by the institutionalized oppression of women by the Taliban. Therefore, while prosecution on gender grounds, we as a crime under international law, as a crimes against humanity, as Mr. Bennett was elaborating on that, the unique architecture and the intent of gender apartheid remains legally unaddressed, leaving a crucial legal accountability gap. As a result of this accountability gap, there is a legal vacuum to hold the regimes like the Taliban's accountable for the totality of the crimes that they are committing. And the codification of gender apartheid can provide us with a powerful legal mechanism for advancing accountability and closing this crucial legal gap by enabling legal action both against the state, as Natasha explained earlier, and individuals to be held criminally responsible. Likewise, the codification of gender apartheid could strengthen existing international criminal law and also human rights frameworks by expanding mechanisms for accountability, prevention, and reparation, making it a powerful step towards gender justice, not only in the case of Afghanistan, but also globally. At the same time, gender apartheid intersects with race, religion, ethnicity, and class, with intergenerational impact, and codifying it invites a more holistic understanding of the operation and injustices, and while deepening an intersectional legal approach to address the situation in Afghanistan. Therefore, there is a growing advocacy to support and recognize the gender apartheid as a distinct crime under the international law. A momentum is being built across different spectrums of actors, including different bodies within the United Nations, as well as international jurists, Nobel laureates, international rights organizations, civil society organizations, and most importantly, the movement is supported by the people of Afghanistan and the women of Afghanistan, as the movement to codify gender apartheid was initially started by the women of Afghanistan in the late 1990s when the Taliban was in power for the first time. And the current campaigns actually built on those efforts. The draft Crimes Against Humanity Treaty currently before the General Assembly's 6th Committee, which is scheduled for negotiations between 2026 and 2029, presents an important opportunity to codify gender apartheid within international law. During this period of 3 years, member states will negotiate the draft treaty, providing a forum to codify emerging crimes at the international level. And the treaty presents a prospect to discuss not only codifying gender apartheid, but also other gendered crimes, such as forced pregnancy, slave trade, and forced marriage as a separate offenses under the convention. As of early last year, 2024, at least 10 UN member states, including Afghanistan, Australia, Malta, Brazil, Mexico, and several others, have publicly indicated openness to exploring codification of gender apartheid under the treaty. And to respond to your last question of how these mechanisms actually complement each other, I have to mention, as my co-panelists will also be deliberated on the accountability initiatives on Afghanistan such as a UN-mandated investigative mechanism, we believe that can play a crucial complementary role in the process of codifying gender apartheid. An investigative mechanism could assist by documenting evidence of systematic gender-based oppression, exposing patterns of abuse, and building a factual records that underscores the need for codification of gender apartheid. The empirical foundation that could reinforce advocacy efforts for an increased pressure on states and international bodies to hold alleged perpetrators accountable, making the case for legal recognition of gender apartheid more urgent. And equally, the codification of gender apartheid could clarify legal and accountability frameworks, allowing investigative mechanism to function with more authority and accuracy. And together, I believe the ICC, a potential ICJ case, and the UN investigative mechanism could strengthen one another, ensuring that scrutiny and reinforcement, and also advancing justice and accountability for the women and people of Afghanistan. I had to stay within the 5 minutes, and I tried to talk very fast, and I hope that I was clear. Thank you so much, Formally Saib.
Thanks so much for your insights and also for joining us online at this very late hour from Australia. Now we have heard about the 3 very important initiatives on accountability on Afghanistan, their current state, the potentials and limits, and I would like to turn now to the gaps that still exist. They were mentioned by our previous speakers. But I will invite our 4th panelist, who is Ms. Farishta Abbasi, a very outspoken advocate and a researcher at the Afghanistan researcher at Human Rights Watch, who would elaborate on this aspect. And I would like to read out the questions specifically to you. What gaps exist that are there until today, and what kind of mechanism is needed? And how could this mechanism support other initiatives we discussed? And what recommendations you would like to make to member states who are present in this room? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much for Moliseb, and thanks so much to the organizers and co-sponsors of this event. It's an extremely important event on exploring all options of accountability for Afghanistan, because I think all of us in the room agree that there is an urgent need for accountability in the country. The situation has really deteriorated, and I'm not going to go into the details of every ban in Afghanistan, because you probably have heard a lot about it, and that also worries me, that we're sort of used to hearing that that Afghan women in Afghanistan are not allowed to go to school beyond 6th grade. They face severe restrictions on accessing employment. They're being arbitrarily detained for not being accompanied by a male guardian or a mahram. They're being detained for bad hijab, as the spokesperson of the PVPV said. So that's a little bit worries me, and I'm really hoping that this time the Council moves forward and takes concrete action. So with that, I would like to present the letter that was Andy Joseph also mentioned. 107 organizations, including organizations, Afghan civil society organization in the country, have presented a letter last week. Some of you may have received copies of that letter. They have urged this council to establish a comprehensive independent accountability mechanism this session, because they believe that's what is needed for Afghanistan. There is a huge gap of documentation of abuses in Afghanistan. All of these abuses are happening in the country with a huge gap of documentation. So the mechanism that these organizations, or including the organization that I work for, Human Rights Watch, is supporting the letter as well, or is the mechanism that we're calling for, will be investigating and documenting grave abuses in Afghanistan. It will preserve evidence and will identify perpetrators. No one currently in Afghanistan is doing this sort of documentation. No one currently is identifying perpetrator. There's no institution, and no one can actually replace the role of such a mechanism. So this mechanism will complement the other accountability initiatives. For example, the ongoing ICC investigation for Afghanistan. It will also be able to complement the CEDA initiative, a potential case at the International Court of Justice, as well as universal jurisdiction cases. So it's extremely important to also highlight that this mechanism needs to be comprehensive, which means that it should be able to look at all crimes committed by all parties at all times, because it's extremely important to make sure that this mechanism is credible. We are at a time that we don't want to create hierarchy of victims. We don't want to create double standards. So it's very important to make sure that this mechanism obviously is focusing on the current situation, should have a great focus on the rights of women and girls, because Afghanistan is the worst women's rights crisis in the world. But it should also be able to look back if it sees necessary, because Afghanistan has been a country in conflict for decades now, and some of all what is happening in the country, these mechanisms should be able to look back into the root causes of that. I also want to echo what the Special Rapporteur mentioned in his report in June, that immunity has emboldened the Taliban. And you can see that last year in August 2024, they passed a new law, the so-called PVPV law, which is the law that says women's voices cannot be heard outside their houses, which says that women cannot use public transportation without being accompanied by mahram. And also, I mean, extremely concerning that now it's up to taxi drivers and men in Afghanistan, basically, to make sure that women are in full hijab if they want to use the public transportation. So women could be refused to get into a taxi if the taxi driver thinks that they're not in full hijab, or if they don't have a mature mahram with them. So you can clearly see that women in Afghanistan have no say. Women's social and public life has been taken away from them. They don't feel safe. And at this point, they're waiting for us to see how we respond to all what is happening in Afghanistan. The session that happened September last year was right after the PVPV law, and I believe that the international community missed a chance to strongly respond to that law, send a strong message to the Taliban that they will be held accountable for the grave abuses. And I very much agree with the Special Rapporteur that what is happening in Afghanistan does not only belong to Afghanistan. It is an attack on the rights of women and girls globally, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that we are responding to that. Again, I think we cannot wait another year of deterioration of the situation in Afghanistan. No further deferral of this. When we started, the call for the establishment of a mechanism has been led by the Afghan civil society, and it has been a consistent call from them. But I do remember that, at least from the time that I was involved, every session, I remember last year, we were being told that, yes, there is a need for the mechanism, but we need a bit more time to discuss. Yes, there is a need for a mechanism, but let's wait for another session. So I think we are at the point that the political decision needs to be taken now. If there is an intention and will, that should happen now. We do not need another options or scoping paper, because we do know what our options are. We do know we do not need to waste our resources on another paper while we know where these resources must be used. So this is time for this council to move, especially for the EU as a pen holder for Afghanistan's resolution, to put a technical proposal on the establishment of a comprehensive independent accountability mechanism to complement the work of Special Rapporteur, but also the ongoing accountability options for Afghanistan. We need to stand in solidarity with Afghan women who are still resisting the Taliban abuses, not by words, but by actions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abbasi. I'm aware that we started a bit late. We got around 20 minutes from the Secretariat, but I'm also aware that the plenary starts at 3, so we try to be very brief and keep with the tradition of opening the floor to maybe just one question or comment, preferably from member states. If they have any last doubt and they want to ask any of our experts in the room, I open the floor to them, and also maybe one question online. Please raise your country name tag or your hand if you want to speak. Great. That's wonderful. As there's no objection and no doubt, and I hope we have all convinced you all to establish the mechanism. And before concluding, I would like to give the floor back to Ambassador Ndishe for 1 minute.
Just thank you very much. So formally, I requested the floor because I forgot at the beginning to thank all our sponsors and co-sponsors here, member states, particularly Liechtenstein and Iceland, who have supported this, also Permanent Mission of Afghanistan ourselves, but also all the other entities and NGOs together, which made this possible. I understand that, you know, it's we need to keep pushing. We should not lose hope. And we are really hopeful that in this session, at the end of this session, we will see a resolution which will have Afghanistan's independent investigative mechanism. And with this, I really thank all the member states. I've been in Brussels in the month of July. We work with, you know, closely with EU. We discuss this, and I've been in Australia talking to Australians, and I know all the civil society organizations are also doing their work. So with this, I thank you very much, and we are hoping that, you know, by October we have this resolution. Thank you.
I thank also Ambassador, and I also want to echo what my colleagues said, that I hope that this, as this is the last side event on Afghanistan this session, but then the discussions move to you in informal discussions on the text of the resolution. So I hope this is the last time that we call, urge, or even beg for the Council to take action. And by next time that we come in March, and we all really talk about how to operationalize this mechanism and also how best civil society or other states could contribute. And with that, I thank all the distinguished panelists for their very valuable insights, and also I thank the audience here in the room and also online for giving us their time and for their engagement. I thank you all, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.